Now, turning to the budget request for the department, and again, Secretary Jewell, thank you. Secretary Connor, thank you for being here. The budget request is $12.1 billion for programs within this subcommittee's jurisdiction. This includes $200 million for a proposal similar to last year, which allows certain firefighting costs to be appropriated as disaster funds. The budget request is almost $1.4 billion above the current year spending levels. And Secretary, I noted when you were before the Energy Committee last week that the request violates the Budget Control Act. It ignores those statutory caps that are imposed by the BCA and proposes new spending as if we had already moved to lift sequestration. And as I mentioned in that committee, and I will repeat here, I do think that that demonstrates wishful thinking and not the governance that we need with this budget. Putting aside the discretionary spending requests, there are other proposals in your budget to establish new mandatory spending totaling $2 billion. The request includes $500 million for the LWCF program in 2016 and $500 million per year for 3 years in the new mandatory spending for the Park Service Centennial. Unfortunately, there are no specific offsets for these spending increases. And then, somewhat stunningly to me, when oil prices have fallen dramatically, the Department indicates that it will propose a host of new fees and royalty rate increases on energy producers that will exceed $2.5 billion. Energy producers are already fleeing our public lands because of regulatory headaches and permitting delays. And so I'm looking at this and saying, I don't see how making it more expensive and difficult to do business on public lands is good, sound policy or good for the U.S. Treasury. I think you noted yourself, Secretary, at the energy hearing that, and you said, it's hard to do business on our federal lands. We need to do better. We must do better. There are certainly some things in this budget that I can support. We've got the addressing of the backlog of maintenance in our national parks. That's something that I would hope that we can agree should be a priority for us. Also, fully funding contract support costs for our Native Americans. But the concern that I have with the budget in front of us is that in many cases it avoids the tough choices that must be made between programs in the constrained fiscal environment in which we're operating. In all likelihood, we will have roughly the same amount to spend this year as we did last year under the budget caps, and yet we've got a budget, a proposed budget, that's $1.4 billion above that level. So this committee is forced to make some very difficult choices in how to prioritize among the many programs within the bill, and unfortunately the budget doesn't help by giving us guidance as to the programs that the administration sees as its priorities. Now, Madam Secretary, when you appeared before the Energy Committee last week, I raised with you a number of recent actions that the administration has taken of late that either has or has the potential to do enormous damage to my state. I've mentioned the withdrawal of over 22 million more acres of Alaska from energy production. This has occurred on top of many other restrictions and regulations being imposed on us. These withdrawals have occurred despite the tremendous energy potential in those areas, despite the pressing need to refill our pipeline, and despite extreme opposition from most Alaskans. And then finally, I mentioned at the hearing in energy that beyond energy, we still have the issue of King Cove that is yet unresolved. Last Monday marked 14 long months since the rejection of the necessary life-saving, again, 10-mile, one-lane gravel non-commercial use road, and yet there's nothing in the budget to help those whose lives are needlessly in danger. I was informed this morning that since the energy hearing last week, there have been yet 2 more medevacs out of King Cove until the time that we are here this morning. One was a Coast Guard medevac, the other private. But I mention to my colleagues here at the committee these issues again so that you are aware that these are priorities, not not just for me, but priorities for Americans that live in perhaps some very unique and different situations. And I intend to do what I can to address and correct what I see are clear deficiencies and failures there. So again, my thanks to the Secretary, and appreciate the time that you will give us this morning. We do have votes, 2 votes that are beginning at 11:30, so we'll try to move quickly through it. I want to recognize my ranking member, Senator Udall, for his comments at this time.